I'm LaSandra Cummings for Intervision's Writing Lab, talking today about becoming the kind of writer who finishes things. So many years ago, I remember listening to Elizabeth Gilbert's TED Talk, um, well over a decade ago, and it having a profound impact on how I understood creative practice. And there are two ideas that really stuck out to me. One is that as artists, we are not geniuses. You are not a genius, you have a genius. And the second is something she says about the poet Ruth Stone. She talks about how Ruth Stone talked to her about receiving a poem, that the poem came to her like a freight train roaring uh, through the air, roaring to her, and how she'd have to drop everything and, quote, run like hell, unquote, to the house because she was out in the field to grab a pencil to write the poem down before it left her completely and found another poet. And this idea that when a poem or when language in whatever its form chooses you, you have to drop what you're doing to meet it. Um, Struck me. You have to drop what you're doing, or how you're being, or who you're being to catch it. You have to shift how you're being, who you're being to become the language worker that can tell that particular story before it leaves and finds another storyteller. And that's what I want to talk about in this presentation, not only becoming the kind of writer that can get the story, but becoming the kind of writer who finishes it too. Stone, by way of Gilbert, isn't talking about chaining herself to a desk and pounding out a certain number of words or a certain number of lines at a certain time of day for a certain number of hours in order to access some sort of creative rhythm. What she's talking about by way of Gilbert is being available to and for the creativity of divine influence, which is inspiration and which requires its own sort of discipline. And it's a different kind of discipline than we're used to. When we talk about discipline, we tend to imagine it as hard and rigid. We tend to think of it as a struggle, but I want to talk about discipline through a word it shares a Latin root with. And that word is disciple, a pupil, a student, or a follower of another for the purpose of learning. My question to you is, what if the key to finishing your writing project is becoming a different kind of person than the one who started it? My question to you is, what if the key to getting from the beginning of your writing project to the end of your writing project isn't necessarily transforming the work, but instead transforming yourself? What if, rather than pushing against discipline, the concept of discipline, trying to redefine it, what if we leaned into discipleship and followed the work, the story, wherever it goes for the purpose of increasing our own knowledge about the work that we are doing? What if we followed the work, the story, the language, the idea, its subsequent ideas? Your writing project is where craft meets character. And I don't mean the characters in your book, I mean your own character as an artist. Can you stay with the story, even when the story takes a turn and is no longer what you imagined it would be? Can you remain the person that sees it through? especially when it means that you have to shift your approach or your vision to accommodate the shifts that the story is taking. Maybe in the end, your protagonist doesn't get what they think they need. Maybe it turns out that the person you thought was the foil is actually the more interesting character and should step more into the fore. Maybe you have to throw out pages and pages and whole chapters to get to a story that feels real, that feels true. And maybe that was nowhere in your plan. And really, more than discipleship, what I'm talking about is devotion. When it comes to your creative practice, where do you lay your devotion? And when we talk about devotion, what we're talking about is what occurs when love meets loyalty. To be the kind of writer that finishes things, you have to trust that your attention and your curiosity, your loyalty will lead you where your outline cannot. To finish anything, you have to become someone who can handle being in the midst of things, someone who can tolerate incompleteness, someone who can learn to feel their way through. And this is the point at which creative writing proves to be spiritual work. It requires a sustained practice of faithfulness. Ruth Stone, by way of Gilbert, also said that sometimes she'd catch the tail end of the poem and have to pull it back to her. And in these instances, the poem would come to her, but backward. The spiritual work of your creative writing is the process of figuring out how to listen to what the poem of your writing needs to be, where the line breaks, where the page turns, its sequence and language rhythm. It's about sensing what makes sense, what feels real and true. And this requires you to be comfortable in stillness and silence. It requires you being able to tolerate being in the midst of things, which means it requires you to be okay sitting in what you do not know, sitting in the unknown, sitting in the darkness, figuratively and literally. I remember sitting in the dark, writing a project that took a lot out of me emotionally. To be the kind of writer that finishes your writing project, speak less to your writing, in turn, allowing it to speak more to you. To be the kind of writer that finishes your writing project, move at the pace and in the direction that the story you are telling needs you to move, not necessarily the pace at which you want to move, not necessarily the pace and the direction at which you feel influenced by outside circumstances to move. What is your story telling you inside of you? Because your book is more than an offer of entertainment to your reader. It has to be. It's taken so much for you to bring it through. Your book is a record of who you had to become in the process of writing it.